Order. Welcome to meeting number 69 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. A few things. Please wait until I recognize you before speaking, and for the translators, please speak slowly and clearly. For those of you participating virtually, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking to cut back on feedback. With respect to interpretation, for those of you on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen, either Flore English or French. Select that as appropriate. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function if you wish to speak so you can be identified by the chair. The clerk will manage the speaking order. And finally, no photos are permitted to be taken in the room or screenshots on Zoom. And if you have any technical difficulties, please let me know. I do have one housekeeping item that we should do before this starts. You should all have received a copy from the clerk of the draft budget on the study of the underused housing tax on Canadian border communities. And is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the budget in the amount of $12,750? Great. Adopted. All right. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, May 29th, 2023, the committee is beginning the study of impacts of the underused housing tax on Canadian border communities. Today we have with us Richard Halinda, barrister and solicitor, and we have Thomas Davidoff, Associate Professor, Sauder School of Business, University of British Columbia, by video conference. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking your valuable time to come here today. We'll start off with opening remarks, and then we're going to proceed to rounds of questions. Mr. Halinda, I invite you to start, and you have somewhere around 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a privilege to be here with this committee, and hopefully I can help you out in understanding this UHT and what we need to do about it. I am a practicing lawyer from Niagara. I've been practicing for over 40 years. I'm native to Niagara. A good part of my practice is looking after U.S. citizens who have cottages in Ontario, mostly in Niagara, but all over the province, and most of which are owned by middle-class Americans generationally. So my representation involves buying and selling these cottages and also helping the families to do estate planning with these cottages to pass to the next generation. I also look after the Canadian tax filings for them, so I've got a long working relationship with CRA, that's for sure. Now, Niagara is a border community with Buffalo, New York, and Niagara Falls, New York. And really, we are one community with a river that runs through it. That's the bottom line, one community. In this case, it happens to be the Niagara River. So many of us spend both times on both sides of the border. My understanding is that the purpose of the UHT Act was to address the fairly recent crises in the housing market for Canadians in the big urban centers, and to tax non-Canadians who've parked their money here, buying up residential properties, and then these units are sitting vacant and underused. That is a noble objective, and I support it 100% and worth implementing, but only in the right circumstances. It makes no sense when dealing with residential properties that have been purchased and are being used by non-Canadians for many years as summer residences or what we call cottages. Specifically, our area in South Niagara, which consists of Fort Erie, Crystal Beach, Port Colborne, and Wainfleet, and actually the whole north shore of Lake Erie from the Peace Bridge all the way to the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, has been cottage country for U.S. citizens for over 100 years. Many families are into their third generation of owning these cottages. So these are not the people who have parked their money in Canada for passive income. They reside here during the summer months, generally May the 24th to Labor Day. They're members of our local community, including sporting organizations, clubs, and churches, a number of which they have founded or co-founded, as well as being big supporters of our local businesses and cultural events. those members on the committee who live in similar areas will be familiar with these summer residents and what they mean to our communities. The Act puts every non-Canadian residential owner to the task of filing a UHT tax return, which is different than our T1 returns that we file. And each of these property owners has to first obtain a Canadian tax ID number to do so. The requirement for them is to file, and if they don't have an exemption from the tax, to pay the tax, which is equal to 1% of the value of the property. And this has left a bad taste in the mouths of many of our U.S. citizens who are our summer residents. They believe that the community, that is the Canadian element of our community, has abandoned them. And we've seen an exodus in the selling of their cottages. Now, we were advised that this act and the regulations would exempt cottages and recreational properties, but that has proven not to be the case. The act has created a series of available exemptions from the payment of tax, but there are too many inequities as to how they are implemented. Now, I could speak for a couple of hours on this. I understand we only have 5 minutes, and I've already used some of that up. So I am more than happy to discuss this through the question and answer period, and I welcome any questions you have in that regard. However, I would say simply this, and in my opinion, the exemption from the tax requirement to pay tax should be based on usage. That was the idea, and not so much as to where it is located. We've got situations where one summer residence is exempt here, and this one on the same street is not exempt. That's just one of the inequities that I can further talk to you about. The Act and its regulations have created and have had an inequitable and discriminatory effect on our U.S. summer residents. I've offered my time to the government to sit down with decision makers or drafters of legislation to produce further regulations under the Act to eliminate these problems. And I've even provided sample draft clauses for this purpose. In February, I wrote to the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister in regards to this, and I'm waiting for her response or from people in her office to do so. I'm prepared to work with everybody on this. And these issues are not true just for Niagara, but to countless waterfront areas and lakes and rivers all across our country. This is more than just a border community issue, but it is a border community issue as well. Now, the filing deadline for the 2022 UHT return and the payment of the tax was extended by the government to October the 31st from the April 30th requirement. These regulatory changes are needed to be in place by then, so there is a sense of urgency to this matter. Our summer residents deserve to be treated fairly and better than they have been. We'd expect nothing less for our Canadians who winter into the United States, and we would not want any kind of reciprocating tax to be applied to them. And I know that this has been talked about, and I believe Congressman Higgins will be talking to you this afternoon, and I'm sure he'll have something to say about that. I don't want us to go there. I would be more than happy to assist this committee in its further investigations and deliberations on this matter. I can provide you with written materials, but the bottom line is taxing these cottages is not going to do anything to solve the housing crisis that this act was supposed to deal with.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there. I gave you a little extra time because we only have two witnesses this hour, but we'll now have to move to our next witness. So please go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Tom Davidoff. I'm a housing economist at the University of British Columbia, and I'm going to focus my remarks on the following considerations. Number one, expensive housing markets in the U.S. historically have had high property tax rates overall and required Canadian owners of vacation properties to pay higher effective rates than some U.S. residents. Number two, taxes on homes that are not primary residences are a reasonable form of taxation. Number three, I don't see a strong case for imposing taxes or quotas differently by nationality, as good alternatives are available. On the first point, the U.S. has only recently eliminated federal income tax deductions for local property taxes. An American with a combined state and federal marginal tax rate of 40% and with sufficient itemized deductions received a 40% tax break on their property taxes through deductibility. I enjoyed large write-offs in that way when I taught at UC Berkeley and owned a home in Oakland. While that and of course that would not be available to a Canadian who owned a property in the U.S. because they're not U.S. taxpayers. While that preference was recently removed, I don't believe that fairness considerations with respect to Canadian owners of U.S. property played an important role in that rollback. In fact, I suspect it had nothing to do with it at all. So I'm a proud dual U.S. and Canadian citizen, but in this case, I do not believe unfair differentials in property tax rates between Americans and Canadians should be an important consideration. On the second point, expensive Canadian cities, particularly Vancouver, where I am now, thanks for letting me speak remotely, have highly suboptimal mixes of income and property taxation. Our tax system, roughly speaking, provides the following instructions. Do not work for a living. We tax income and sales at high rates. Do buy property. Residential property faces very low mill rates relative to the U.S. Okay, so that's the tax code, but by contrast, our regulatory system provides the instruction that affordable homes should not be built. Instead, we reserve most of our land for single-family homes, which are far beyond the reach of the overwhelming bulk of the income distribution in Vancouver and Toronto. And of course, developing raw land is appropriately very difficult. So what's the outcome of that combination of taxes and regulations? We've invited the local and global rich to buy property in Canada and have fed gigantic investment demand for Canadian homes, pushing up prices. That's not the only cause of housing unaffordability here, but it doesn't help. Here's a fact from research with students of mine, Paul Boniface-Cabre and Craig Jones, and I've included links to 2 relevant papers. Homes in the top 5% of value in Greater Vancouver as of 2018 had a median value of $3.7 million, but the median owner of those homes paid income taxes of just $15,800. Buying that home with Canadian taxable income and 20% down would involve paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual income taxes. The relationship between earned income in Canada and property value is very weak in Greater Vancouver. So instead of low property taxes and high income and sales taxes, we should have the opposite. We should have low income and sales taxes and high property taxes. Now, as you know, pushing for generally higher property taxes is politically unwise. So that's not on the policy menu. However, it is entirely reasonable to approximate good policy by requiring owners of properties who do not contribute income taxes here to pay higher property taxes. Empty homes taxes in Vancouver and BC provincially have raised considerable revenue and appear to have returned many homes, thousands, tens of thousands even of homes, to primary residence use. Okay, the foreign empty homes tax is one approach, but an alternative would be just to charge an alternative minimum tax based on property value. Okay, so just in Greater Vancouver, a very reasonable minimum income tax of 1% of property value would raise something like $2 billion annually. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you have $1 million home, you got to pay $20,000 in income tax. If you pay $10,000 in income tax, then under that proposed alternative tax, you'd kick in an additional $10,000. Okay, so you could raise $2 billion a year from that annually in Greater Vancouver, similar amount in Greater Toronto, which is larger, but where income and property value are more closely linked. Using income taxes paid or declared rental income, along with long-term primary residence exemptions for seniors, if those were the exemptions, income tax paid or declared rental income, then you'd obviate any ethical and trade problems associated with nationality-based taxes and bans. Thank you.
That was you get the gold star for timing. You had 4 seconds left, so you did exceptionally well. And those were some great points. I'll turn to our first round of questions, and I'll go to Mr. Baldinelli for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us this morning. I'm going to begin by going to Mr. Halinda. Today's study, again, is on the impacts of the underutilized or underused housing tax on Canadian border communities. Mr. Halinda, you talked about it just briefly, about the uniqueness of our community and the relationships. I always say it's a binational community. Americans have been locating cottages there since the 1800s. I think the Crystal Beach Amusement Park was built in 1888. And Cherry Hill Golf Course, which hosted the Canadian Open in 1972, was formed and built in 1922 by 9 Americans who were cottage residents there. So I was wondering if you could quickly talk about the uniqueness of our community.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it is unique, and again, there's many spots along the lake. I'm familiar with Lake Erie because I grew up there. But at the end of the 19th century, many Americans came over to the northern shore of Lake Erie and bought property. In fact, opened up subdivisions there where cottages were being built. Now, this is before there was a Peace Bridge. They had to come over across in a ferry. And that ferry left the city of Buffalo and landed in the little village of Crystal Beach, the little hamlet. And there in 1888, you're correct, the Crystal Beach Amusement Park was built, one of the first ones in the area. And that whole area became a summer resort. There's hundreds and hundreds of cottages that were built there, all by Americans from 1888 through the end of the First World War and thereafter. And so they're part of the community. They live there. I grew up in Port Colborne, as I think I said. I knew when May the 24th weekend was because our pastor would stand up in that pulpit and say, one thing he said once a year, I welcome our summer residents. Now, he didn't say, I welcome the foreigners, I welcome the non-citizens, I welcome the Americans. They were the summer residents. That's what my parents called them. That's what we call them. They were the residents of our community. So if you don't live in a border town, it may be hard to imagine that two different countries could be together and live together as one. But that's how I grew up, and it's still that way to this day.
I agree with you, and that's how I've grown up as well. My wife went to nursing school at Duville. My brother put both his boys in high school in Buffalo. Despite the fact he only lives 2 minutes away from me, he puts them in high school in Buffalo. I mean, it isn't an international border. It's a river that separates two friends, for example. Now, the government had talked about that it would have consulted with stakeholders prior to the implementation of the unused housing tax. When were you first made aware, or did you have any input, or any of the residents that you represent have input into the stakeholder discussions?
I did not, and nor do any of the people I know had any contact with it either. I came across it because part of the Canadian Bar Association is when new legislation comes out, we get notice of it, and I got a copy of the UHT Act, and I read it, and that's when I really learned about it. And it's a very difficult act to read, as most tax acts are. I do tax work, and so I know they're difficult to write, and they're even more difficult to read. But I had some real concerns with that, and so I started on this avenue to try to learn about it and to get this thing fixed, because I thought there was issues. March in 2022, so I've been at it more than a year.
Thank you for that. The same. I was contacted by an American resident in February of 2022, wrote to the government in March of 2022, actually raised it during my budget discussions in the House of Commons in April, and then we held a summer consultation in 2022 with American residents, all trying to get clarification on the rules. And we're here a year later, still seeking clarification on some of the rules. You talk about this could be some quick regulation changes that could address some of the concerns. Not only could you table that information, but could you quickly describe some of the regulation changes that you think would handle these concerns?
Okay, in a nutshell, a couple of things that we could do very easily. The regulations set up a scheme of rural and urban areas. Now, these are not based on where are the cottages. These are based on the census maps that the government of Canada has and defines urban and rural areas. So if you are living in your cottage is in a rural area and you're there 28 days a year, you're exempt from the tax. You still have to file, but you're exempt from the tax. Makes sense because you're using it, so it's not underused. But if you're in an urban area, you don't get the 28 days exemption, even if you're there 128 days, which makes no sense. And if we go back to Crystal Beach, this little community of 8,500 people, All these cottages built around that park, now the park's gone, but the beach is still there, beautiful beach. They don't get the exemption because they're in an urban area because of the consensus map, from the census map. Why? If they're using it, why aren't they getting the exemption? It should not matter whether you're in this rural area or the urban area. If you're using it, you're using it. It's not underused and it's not vacant. So that's the first one. Yep, sorry.
Thank you for that. Can you table your proposed regulation changes that you'd like to see, and also the letter that you had written recently to the Deputy Prime Minister? I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Great. That's your 6 minutes. Now we'll turn to Mr. Varani for 6 minutes as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Halinda, Mr. Davidoff, for your testimony. So, Mr. Davidoff, I just want to start with you. So, the genesis of what we have with the underused housing tax is about dealing with housing affordability and the fact that housing affordability is informed by many components, as you outlined, and one of them is by people that effectively are parking money in Canadian properties, not using those properties, and that's actually depriving Canadians of a chance to either purchase those homes, making those homes more expensive to purchase, or even sometimes depriving them of an opportunity to rent those homes. Do I have that aspect of the rationale correct, Mr. Davidoff?
I can't tell you what the rationale of government was. I'm sure it was a concern about housing affordability. And of course, homes that aren't used as primary residences, be they by non-Canadian or Canadian people able to afford second homes, take away the affordability for people who just work for a living in a given market and want to live in a home.
And you're talking just from Vancouver. I represent constituents in Toronto, but this isn't just a Vancouver or Toronto phenomenon. Is that fair? The escalating price of housing is something that's affecting Canadians across the board?
I believe that is absolutely correct. And, you know, people are mobile, and immigrants are particularly mobile inherently. And so before too long, you know, the total amenity, wage, cost of living package in any two Canadian cities kind of has to equalize. It can't be a better deal to live in Moose Jaw than it is in Vancouver, or else everybody would move from Vancouver to Moose Jaw. So problems in one Canadian community eventually are going to be problems in all Canadian communities.
Okay, and in calibrating this, there's been some talk thus far about the consultations that took place, et cetera. But in calibrating the actual tax itself, there's some efforts made to ensure that people that are using their properties, as opposed to those who are leaving them vacant, are not caught. So can you talk a bit about some of the exemptions that were made? And I'm going to direct you to two. I understand that if your property is not accessible year-round, let's say it's just a summer property, can't be accessed during the year-round, that's not the type of property that a Canadian might want to buy and live in as a year-round home. So therefore, that's not subject to this tax. So if you can confirm if my understanding is correct. But secondly, with respect to the exchange we were just having with Mr. Halinda here, can you comment a bit about this issue about using a property for 28 days as long as if it's in an eligible area? How is that exemption operating on the ground? So over to you, Mr.
Is that for me or for Halinda?
For you first, and then I'll ask Mr. Halinda to comment as well.
Well, I'm going to defer to Mr. Halinda in terms of implementation on the ground.
Okay, can you comment? Can you just clarify, is my assessment accurate with respect to seasonal properties that are only open, for example, in the summertime? It's not a year-round cottage, doesn't have heating. That is not subject to this kind of tax. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, but I didn't implement it. I'm not familiar with that detail.
Okay, so Mr. Halinda, can you comment on, because if I understand it correctly, the gravamen of your concern is that it's fine that we've got a usage requirement of 28 days, but you're concerned about how the eligible area is defined, and you're saying that pursuant to the census, which we're using as the criterion, that's it's casting too wide a net, in fairness from your perspective. So how would you propose that be recast?
Monsieur le Président, l'interprétation a été interrompue.
So can we check the interpretation? Is the interpretation functioning now? Yes? Excellent. Give you like 20, 30 seconds more and just repeat your question.
So repeat the question. So I understand that the gravamen of your concern is that there's a 28-day exemption if you're using it for 28 days or more. That's great, but it only applies to certain eligible areas. And the way an eligible area is defined whether a place is rural or urban, that net is being cast a bit too wide based on the census that we're using as a criterion. So if that's my understanding, is that correct? But secondly, how would you propose that we redefine what is an eligible location for this exemption?
Okay, so yes, they have this eligibility for this 28 days only in the rural area. So if you're in an urban area, you're not entitled to the 28-day exemption, which to me, I mean, if you're using it, you're using it. So one of the suggested changes I made was to have that differentiation between rural and urban eliminated. What do we need that for?
Would you agree that there's an acute housing costing issue in urban centers in Canada?
Yes, I do. Yeah, in the urban centers, absolutely. But I don't know, I mean, I'm a little bit familiar with Toronto. I don't know how many cottages are in Toronto.
But if there was no rural-urban divide, effectively the exemption of 28 days would apply to a downtown Toronto condo or one in Montreal or one in Calgary or one in Vancouver.
Well, I see where you're coming from on that. So there definitely needs to be something with that. But again, I think if you're looking at the type of residential unit that it is, like, that could be worked through. I would definitely think that could be worked through.
It would definitely be helpful, pursuant to what Mr. Baldinelli said, seeing it in writing, the proposed changes, because that would be helpful for our deliberations. I'll stop there. Thank you.
That's great. Monsieur Savard Tremblay, pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Savard Tremblay, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question will be to Mr. Halinda, but I'm following a bit with the questions of my predecessor. First of all, when we talk about a cottage, and this is the door that we just had opened, and it seems to be more on the unit rather than the distinction between rural or urban. We always think about a rural area for a cottage. And do you have any figures on whether or not the majority of cottages that would be subject to this tax are in rural areas?
I don't have any data on how many would be in rural as opposed to how many would be in the urban area. I don't have that. But again, I can tell you from my experience, and I do the filings for all my American clients on this UHT, so I've been actually on the ground with this, is that there are countless within the urban area that are affected by this and have got to do this, whereas if that cottage was a half a mile or a block away, they wouldn't have to do this. That's where I think that the inequity lies. But I don't have the numbers, but I mean, we could get those for you if you wanted, for sure. Hopefully that answers.
Absolument. Ben, écoutez, je pense, puis je vous
And I think that indeed it's the definition that will find the problem, because cottage necessarily is a secondary residence, as we've just heard, and whether it's in a city or a rural area, if it's a secondary residence. But I think that, generally speaking, a cottage would be in a rural area. And I also wanted to ask you, and you could add something on this issue as well, the 28 days, is there a real mechanism for verifying how much time is spent, or is it just based on the declaration made by the owner?
Yeah, very good question. And I've worked a lot with CRA over the past number of months to try to get answers to how are they going to interpret these exemptions, because the tax return is complicated and you have to check out boxes. And I've talked to some very good people at CRA, and basically I'm told the policies will be developed as we go along, which makes it difficult for an advisor to tell somebody what to say and not to say on these forms. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought on your question. Sorry.
En fait, je vous demande.
I wondered if there's any mechanism to verify whether the 28 days were real, or whether it's just the declaration by the owner.
Oh, there isn't a mechanism. So I don't know whether they're going to check when people cross at the border, whether Canada Border Security is going to provide that data. But basically, the return itself doesn't require for any proof. It just says, do you agree that you've been here 28 days or not? So it's all, I mean, every tax return is subject to audit. So I don't know if the tax department's going to audit the 1 million or 2 million of these they're going to get. I don't know, but I'd have to defer that to the CRA to see how they're going to deal with that.
Oui, parce que j'imagine quand même.
Yes, because I can imagine that if we see that the citizen hasn't crossed the border for 28 days and then says that they've occupied this unit for 28 days, and we could conclude that it was not correct.
I would think that you'd be able to follow up through that, yes. Yeah. But I've told my people, you make sure you tell the truth, right? If you're not here at the 28 days, you don't use it, period.
Merci. Combien de temps j'ai, monsieur?
Thank you. How much time do we have? Mr. Davidoff. I was reading about your career. You're an economist, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your proposal, you say that to assist in the housing crisis, there could be an increase in property or lowering your property taxes in Vancouver. And in your presentation, you say give the example of Vancouver. I don't know whether there would be a single code. What do we have to look out for? Is it the size of the city or the occupancy rate and with regard to Vancouver? And would that be applicable to other municipalities as well? What are the common points?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question.
So, when thinking about property taxation, really two issues come up in terms of where you want to have high property taxes. You don't want to have property linked taxation. You don't want to have taxes where people can run away from the tax. So in markets where homes just won't get built if taxes are too high, but there'll be lots of building when taxes are high, that's a place you should have low property taxes. Of course, Vancouver and Toronto, we know there's gigantic lines to build homes, and the city can't keep up with permitting, and zoning restricts building, so higher property taxes don't really have an adverse effect. If you're in some rural area, maybe near Niagara, but not a desirable location on the water, homes are going to, nobody's in a great rush to build homes. A tax might deter construction. So urban areas where it's hard to build, and of course, where affordability is a problem, is where you'd want to focus higher property taxes offset by lower income taxes. Doing it globally, I mean, I must say, I don't know how much these cottages cost. If you're looking at a few $1,000s a year for the overseas residents, tops, that doesn't seem heartbreaking to me.
We'll turn to our next questioner for 6 minutes, Mr. Cannings.
Well, thank you, and thank you to both the witnesses here today. I'm going to start with Mr. Davidoff, but first I'll say, I represent an area, the Okanagan Valley, British Columbia, and the Kootenays. Like Niagara, we're on the border. We have a lot of visitors every year. We really have a very large tourism component. We both make good wine. I'll say that to Tony this time. But where we differ is we don't have, at least in my experience, we don't have this history of American residents moving into the Okanagan in the summer with cottages. What we have, there was, when I was younger, many years ago, there was a lot of Washington residents that would come into the Okanagan of British Columbia for tourism. But most of the homes that are owned now on a seasonal basis in my area are, I would say, owned by people from Calgary or Vancouver, and they're not cottages. These are very expensive homes. I used to live in a little town called Naramata, and in recent years, the school population in Naramata has gone from 250 kids to 60 kids, because most of the homes in downtown Naramata are not owned by residents. They're owned by people in Vancouver and Calgary, and they're put out to Airbnb. So with all that, I just want to ask Mr. Davidoff about the British Columbia examples of, the speculation tax. and how that has been implemented. It's implemented in specific urban areas. You know, it's not defined by any census thing. It's defined in a regulation that lists those areas. If you could just talk about that speculation tax, what it has accomplished and how it's implemented.
Right. So the speculation and vacancy tax is essentially an empty homes tax with some other, issues related to higher rates for people from overseas. If you earn overseas income predominantly, there's an additional tax, but it's largely an empty homes tax. And it is, as you say, implemented in markets struggling with affordability. And there was some discussion, of course, about places like the Okanagan, which are expensive for people trying to make a living, but also tourism is an important part of the economy. So there's a tension in applying a tax on vacation homes because you don't want to kill the vacation industry, but you also want to make sure there's affordable homes for locals. The evidence from the combination of empty homes and speculation and vacancy tax between Vancouver and the province is from CMHC, something like 10,000, 15,000 homes have reverted from vacation or, temporary or empty use into the rental market. That's their belief. And so, that's a help. That's, for a large community, something like a year's worth of construction turned over to local occupancy. And the other side of it, of course, is a fair amount of revenue raised.
Right, and I didn't add the fact that the rental market throughout my riding is extraordinarily tight, and part of the problem is these relatively large numbers of homes that are owned by people from elsewhere and put out for Airbnb, and it doesn't matter how big or small the community within my riding, that this is a big issue. And I'll turn to Mr. Halinda now, and I just want to get a sense of the Niagara situation. What kind of homes are these? Are these expensive homes? Are they put out on Airbnb outside that 28-day period when people aren't there? And because it's my experience that people who own vacation homes in my riding aren't there for 28 days. They might be there for 3 or 4 weeks. Well, maybe 4 weeks, that's 28 days. But, my neighbor is from Alberta, and I only see him for a couple of weeks every summer.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question. So we have a different situation because our cottagers, and first of all, we got a variety of homes from the very low bottom of a little, I don't want to say shack, but a very small place, to a bigger place. No question, we've got everything in between. But the ones that are owned by the American people are summer residents. They're summer residents. They actually put their toes in the sand, right? But we've had Canadians buy along the lake since COVID. And a number of them, they're not interested in putting their feet in the sand. They're interested in money. And those places have been turned into Airbnbs. And we've had a real problem with that in our area, as have a lot of communities across this country. And the town of Fort Erie put some bylaws in place to deal with it because of the unruliness that a lot of these Airbnbs have caused in these quiet, residential cottage areas. So there are very few of the Americans, I'm not sure I even know one that's in that Airbnb business, but I know the Canadians that are in there have bought these as second and third homes, not to live in, but for income-producing purposes. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
That's the end. That's exactly
Thank
6
you.
minutes. So
Out of
we'll now
time.
turn to Mr. Carey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with Mr. Halinda. I'm from Oshawa, but my cousins were in St. Catharines, and we used to go down all the time, and it was this back and forth. And I know in Niagara, it's a fairly big population for that area. I think it's around 400,000, but for the cottage area, maybe it's only 30,000. So when the government looks at that, census, they capture everybody. Now, what I really appreciate is you're giving us some ideas on the fix. And one of your fix was to say this urban-rural divide. How would the government classify those areas so it wouldn't be captured with that census? Do you have any idea?
In fact, I drafted that for the Deputy Prime Minister, so I will make sure that you get that, but it's very simple, and it gets around that issue, right within the regulation that's already there.
My follow-up for you would be, the Department of Finance did say in the fall of 2021 that they consulted stakeholders. Do you know the people you represent, did any of them get an opportunity to have any input on this, or did you personally, did the government make an effort to actually get this out to consult with stakeholders?
I don't know of anybody that was consulted. I know I wasn't. No. I mean, not that I have to be, but I'm just saying that I'm not aware of any of that consultation process. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned in your opening, I believe, that you were in touch with the minister. I think you said in February. Did you raise this issue with anybody in the federal government before February? Like, how long have you been in touch with the federal government on the issue?
My first discussions were back in March of last year.
So March, oh, geez, okay.
And then I got to meet Mr. Bolnelli this summer, and we had such a public outcry in our area and wanting to get information from these cottage owners. And of course, everyone was directed to the helpline. Well, the helpline can be helped for some things, but not many things. You know, people are on the phone, including myself, for 2 hours or more before we get to talk to anybody. And then we're talking to a low-level worker, which unfairness to her or him, they don't have the information to even answer the question. So a lot of those calls really went unanswered because no one could give an answer. Yeah. And so we've been working on trying to get answers, and I've been constantly working with CRA on that regard.
Well, that I find it a little disturbing because you did mention February of 2023 that you're in touch with the minister, but you've been working on this over a year. Have you gotten any written response? Did you say her office has not even gotten back to you yet?
I've not received any response.
Yeah, that is concerning because it seems like there is a regulatory fix here that we could be implementing that would really lower the stress levels of everybody. Maybe we can see if we can help in that regard. One of the worries that I have a cottage and have American neighbors, great neighbors. I worry about, though, in Oshawa, we have a lot of people that fly down to the States, and I'm worried about reprisals, retaliation. With you being in these conversations, have you heard of any thoughts that there could be action taken by Americans on Canadians, like a reciprocal type of thing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, again, not that they want it, but you're going to be hearing from Congressman Higgins this afternoon. I think he's on your agenda. I'm sure he's going to talk to you about that because he has tabled that in Congress. He has tabled that at numerous meetings in New York State, where he's a congressman, particularly in the Buffalo area. And he's saying, look, we don't want to be retaliatory, but we want to be dealt with fairly, and this act has not been dealt. The problem is the brush that was used to paint this act was too broad. And so we've got lots of collateral damage that I don't think was ever intended. So by regulation, we can get it fixed, and we need to get it fixed. It's the right thing to do.
I agree with you. I don't think there's any intention, but we don't want to have any bad relations with our best neighbors, that's for sure. 30 seconds, Mr. Chair. Okay, maybe just a quick, Mr. Davidoff, you mentioned the difference between taxing for earned income versus the property tax value. One of the things I know in the GTA, sometimes we have seniors who are very elderly, so they've owned this house for a long time, but the value now is skyrocketed. And then I also know of people from other countries that their cottage may be a condo in Toronto. So on the weekends, instead of going to a rural area, they live in a rural area and they like the arts and entertainment of Toronto, so they come by and they have a little condo there. With your recommendations, would you have I'm way over?
20 seconds over. So
anyway, something to ponder, Mr. Davidoff.
We're going to have to.
Thanks.
We're going to have to move on to Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the presenters. I'm the MP for Sault Ste. Marie, a border town. And, before this, I used to be on city council for 4 terms. And back in the day when non-Canadians were buying property in the area, the concern wasn't about housing availability at that time. Quite frankly, it was about MPAC, the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, which, as I'm sure you're aware of, is the provincial arm that assesses properties. And so back in the day, they used to have assessors. They'd go out, they'd take a look at your property and figure it out. They changed all that. They cut a whole bunch of staff, and they went down to a model where they just took a look at how different properties would sell and what the value was, and then create sort of a circumference. It was driving up taxes because the local council would then set their mill rate against the assessed value, and those properties going up. Now, fast forward to now, the housing market is super hot. My son looked at trying purchasing a bungalow and was, what, a year and a half ago, when overnight was outbid by $85,000. So it's hot all over Canada. And so, and it's just not happening in Sault Ste. Marie. And I think, this, where we're looking at is we're talking about border communities, but really Canada is a border community to the United States. 90% of our population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So I'm going to start with my first question to, I think, Thomas, and I just wanted to talk about the different exemptions that exist. And if you want to talk about the exemptions and the tax that is there now, the intention is to make housing more affordable for Canadians. Is that happening? And, perhaps I'll start with Thomas. And it's a 2-part question. The second part, I just really want you to drill down on what exemptions are there. We've been talking about rural versus urban, but what else is there?
So I think I can speak to exemptions if you provide them to me. I just do not have the administrative knowledge of thoroughly of this. I was asked to testify Friday. I just do not. I can't itemize them for you. I'm happy to respond to itemization by your committee. What I can talk about is the impact on affordability. One, of our existing tax system, and 2, what we've seen in British Columbia. And there is no question that the speculation and vacancy taxes have improved affordability relative to doing nothing. They've raised revenue for the province, which means a lower tax burden or more tax benefits for provincial residents. And they have added homes to the housing stock. Maybe there's been some adverse effect on tourism. I haven't seen that documented. So that's the impact on affordability. In terms of exemptions, I would just repeat what I said. There is a potential trade-off between tourism and housing affordability. And the question is, where do you draw the line? And you have to draw the line somewhere, unless you have sort of, partial exemptions. So the rate declines as you get more and more rural. You're probably going to draw lines, and those lines are informed, but they will be arbitrary. And whenever you have a line, there is going to be horizontal inequality between people on one side of the line in a rural area that's not subject to the tax or gets the 28-day exemption versus something that's declared urban, where there's the natural point that you don't want, temporary housing there. And so you don't get the 28-day exemption.
Thanks for that.
Mr. Sheehan.
I guess my question would be to Richard. And you've talked about your clients and, on average, what is the length of stay in Canada for your clients? How many clients do you have? And what would you say their length of stays are? American.
You're asking for confidential information? I'm only kidding you. No. How many clients? Hundreds.
Okay.
Length of stay? Many from May the 24th to Labor Day. They're here all summer. They come with their families, they come with their kids, they come with their grandparents. I can tell you that I have hundreds of U.S. clients who have never spent a 4th of July in the United States except for the 2 years during COVID when they weren't allowed to cross this border. That's how important and how intertwined these people are in our community. Even on their holiday, they're here in Canada. They're not back in the U.S. So they spend a lot of time here. And again, they bought these places not as passive income and someplace to park the money. They came to use it, raise their kids here, their grandkids here. So they are such an integral part of our community. I just can't stress that enough. And that's why this act, again, you've been brushed too broadly, but this can be fixed, and we need to fix this.
I have to interrupt that we're now over time, and we turn to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Halinda. I think there's also the problem of the lack of consultation and the lack of transparency in political decision making. And you have said that you have had exchanges or tried to with the government. And I've noticed that following the announcement of the 2021 budget that there would be a underused housing tax. Have there been any consultations over these 4 months? Have you participated in them?
I'm not aware of any consultations, and I've not participated in it. The only ones I've had is when I've called somebody else.
So we could say that so we say, I mean, I've got the dates here. I'm look them up, and it was the 6th August 21 to early 2022. You were not contacted. No one asked about your expert opinion.
No, I wasn't. No.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that information. And now, how much time do I have? 1 minute. Not enough. So in I think, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just that I'd be more than happy to work with this committee. I've spent a lot of time on this. I've talked to a lot of people at CRA right to the top. I do tax work. I think I know what the government's trying to do. And again, there's a noble cause to this act. I support it. It's just that the implementation has gone to created this collateral damage that doesn't need to happen. And we need to do something about that. And I'm happy to work with you, all of you, on this. And I'm happy that you're taking the time to look into this matter. I really am, because I was getting frustrated. Was anybody going to listen? So I applaud all of you for taking this on, and I'll help whatever I can.
As Dr. Fraser Crane would say, I'm listening. Now we'll go over to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn again to Mr. Davidoff and again bring up the BC speculation and vacancy tax and whether that model of applying it in certain urban areas would work in this underused housing tax situation across Canada. Whether how has that worked in British Columbia? I know next year, for instance, they're adding some areas to it, and Southern Vancouver Island, for instance. So it seems to be sort of adaptive management. You know, how would that fit with this federal tax? Could that be a model that we could consider?
I believe it could be applied here, of course. As I mentioned, there's a lot of ways. The central issue is that, generally speaking, in Canada, particularly in the expensive markets, and you could demarcate expensive markets, property is undertaxed, and working for a living and buying and selling goods and services is overtaxed. That's a serious problem, and it contributes, of course, to housing unaffordability. Now, in British Columbia, you're mapped in or you're mapped out. Either, that's not partial. You're either subject to the speculation and vacancy tax, or you're not. And as you've mentioned, Kelowna was a controversial case. I have not heard significant problems with the tourism industry. You would know better than I, but I'm not aware of studies that showed that the SVT in BC has has hammered badly the vacation industry there. And you have, of course, a trade-off because in many places there's a local economy that's hindered, as you say, by the inability of locals to find work. Even in Salt Spring Island, where I visited with my wife, it's extremely hard for locals to find work, even though it's entirely a vacation community. So I'm just not aware of places that have been mapped in where there have been problems. Could there have been places that were mapped in and all of a sudden tourism would have died? You'd have to be in such a place where people are just going to leave. Because one important point is, yeah, it's sad for the Americans, but what's going to happen? The houses won't become vacant. They might fall in value, but you probably don't have vacancy. I think the real economic concern would be vacancy and just no more tourism. You'd have to be in a place that's marginally tourist acceptable where there's a lot of Americans. My guess is that's a very small set of places where that would be a severe concern.
And that's time. So we have Congressman waiting, so to try and get us on time, I'm going to have these rounds reduced down to 3 minutes. So Ms. Gladue for 3 minutes, then we'll go to Ms. Dillon for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My area is Sarnia-Lambton. It's on the border, and there are beautiful communities where people from the U.S. have bought cottages in Brights Grove, Port Lambton, Sombra, all the way up to Ipperwash. And I think that although the intention of this regulation was noble, right? We're trying to solve an affordable housing crisis that's come on since 2015. I think the way it was implemented is a problem. And so I would say two things. First solution I can see is that there should be a grandfathering. These people who have owned properties for years and years and years that have passed down through generations clearly should be grandfathered. And secondly, anyone that is considered to be exempt should not even have to file because it's $800 to file and it's such aggravation. Mr. Halinda, would you agree with that?
I wholeheartedly agree with that. That was one of the suggestions I made in some of the discussions I've had is, this housing crisis is a fairly new thing. But these people have owned these places for decades. They didn't cause this housing problem. It's not them.
Absolutely.
So why are we attacking
And
them?
Mr. Davidson, would you also agree with that?
Let me take exception to one category that you mentioned, which is multi-generational. We have a severe problem that there's people who can't afford a place to live. Now, vacation communities, of course, you can raise issues. But if I inherited a lovely place on a lake from my father, who in turn inherited it from his grandfather, I don't know why that makes me a particularly sympathetic person. Usually when we think about who needs government's help, we focus on people at the bottom of the income distribution who've been unfortunate. So I hate to bring this up, but multi-generational for me does not trigger sympathy. It triggers, okay, you got to pay $1,000, $1,500 a year in tax for the house you inherited for nothing, not the end of the world.
Yes, and you have mentioned that you think increasing taxation on those lucky individuals that own high-value homes might be an approach that would free up revenue to create affordable housing. Do you have other solutions that you think we ought to be putting in place to create affordable housing in places like Vancouver?
Of course, yes. So the tax problem is one problem that I mentioned. The other major issue, of course, is regulation. Something like 70 or 80% of residential land in Canada is zoned for single-family homes. Anywhere near Toronto, probably increasingly Ottawa, Montreal, obviously Vancouver, Victoria, many of our urban centers, the single-family home is just a luxury that's not affordable to 90-95% of the income distribution, right? To buy a $2 million house, you need to be earning well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, and that's just not most of the income distribution. So I don't know why the federal government puts up with single-family zoning. You could defund, restrict federal funding to any municipalities or provinces that indulge in it. If the market doesn't want it, of course you should be allowed to build a single-family home, but why you would forbid multifamily is crazy. That is probably the number one issue.
And that's our time. We'll now turn to Ms. Dillon for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Mr. Davidoff. There are a whole host of exemptions to the underused housing tax. Can you please tell us what impact does this tax have on Canadian individuals and families who are in the market to buy a house in Canada at a reasonable price? Thank you.
Right. So there will be two impacts in terms of affordability. Neither of them huge. Properties owned and likely used by people from overseas has largely been addressed in Toronto and particularly Vancouver. And of course, foreign buyers are now banned. So we're not talking about a solution to affordability. However, there are two important effects. Number one is revenue. When the government taxes, and the Americans or other nationalities that do pay these taxes, that's free money to Canada, of course, unless there's reciprocity in taxes, which you've talked about, the government of the U.S. punitively retaliating. As I mentioned, and I think this is important, that retaliation used to exist in the sense that Canadians weren't eligible for property tax deduction from their income taxes. So I do think it would be a bit silly for the U.S. to retaliate on those grounds. On to the second point, of course, is properties that are restored to occupancy by permanent residents of the homes when they're vacated by people who own vacation homes. Vacation homes are, of course, desirable in some districts where communities are reliant on vacationers, but in other communities, we want, ideally, homes to be occupied by people who form part of the tax base. That's an efficiency issue as well as an equity one.
And okay, for the second part of my question, when we spoke about seasonal properties and locations as parts of the exemptions, how common do you think it would be for a property owner to miss all of these exemptions?
I have not done an estimate of how many properties would be subject to the tax. Just don't have that. And, I don't know that would be easily done, but it's a good question.
And do you know where in the U.S. such vacant home taxes do exist?
My understanding is Florida has preferential and maybe Hawaii. That's my understanding just off the top of my head. There may be preferential rates for the U.S. But again, I'll just reemphasize that for many, many years, Americans with high incomes were able to deduct state and local income and property taxes, whereas overseas non-U.S. taxpayers were not. And that could be a significant preference. So in Oakland, if I'm not mistaken, I was paying $10,000 a year in property tax. And I got to deduct roughly between California and the U.S., I was probably pretty close to 50% of that was deductible. So I was getting a $5,000 advantage that a Canadian trying to buy would not have received.
That's all the time we have today. So I want to thank both of our witnesses today for some very interesting testimony. I would invite both of you to submit briefs to the committee so that we can consider that when we do a draft report on this issue. You've both raised interesting and significant issues. We are going to briefly adjourn and suspend, actually, to allow for our next witness, Congressman Higgins from the New York's 26th Congressional District. We'll be back in a few minutes. We'll call the meeting back to order. I just want to welcome Congressman Higgins. It's nice to see you again. Was in Washington, D.C. a week or two ago. It's great to chat about issues and the friendship between Canada and the United States. Congressman Higgins serves on the House Committee on Ways and Means, where he's also a member of the Subcommittee on Health, Trade, and Social Security. In addition, he currently serves as a member of the House Committee on Budget. He is a co-chair of the Northern Border Caucus, from which he advocates for federal policies that recognize the unique needs of northern border communities. Congressman, we normally give a 5 minutes opening statement, but I'm more than happy to give you the latitude to make the statement you'd like to make. So please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this very much. The House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade for calling this meeting as quickly as you have in the aftermath of the meeting that we held in my office in Washington, D.C. I want you to know that I was at a groundbreaking today for the new Buffalo Bills National Football League franchise stadium. It's a $1.5 billion project, but the owner of the Buffalo Bills and the National Football League commissioner thanked the people of Canada for providing a significant ticket buying base, fan base for our professional franchise. And the point that he was making was that Buffalo is a relatively small market, and it's very difficult to sustain a National Football League franchise. But because of our friends and fellow Bills fans in Canada, they, in part, made this day possible to build a new stadium which will keep the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo for 30 years. So we want to thank you for your friendship and for your most recent contributions to the viability of our economy in Buffalo and Western New York. I want to especially thank Mr. Tony Baldinelli for offering the motion to convene this meeting and study. As a representative of Niagara Falls, I appreciate Mr. Baldinelli's continued friendship and partnership. As you know, there's a unique relationship between the United States and Canada, and I'll just tell you quickly my story because it's not unique. It's a story of Buffalo and Western New York as it relates to Southern Ontario, and more specifically the Niagara region, places like Bay Beach, Ontario, Crystal Beach, Thunder Bay, Sherkston, all of those areas that historically we call cottage communities. I grew up, I spent my summers along the Canadian shores of Lake Erie. I played ice hockey up in Fort Erie, Ontario, a place called The Barn, which is no longer there. And it was very easy to traverse the border, and that ease of travel accrued economically and in terms of life quality to the benefit of both people within the Niagara region of Southern Ontario and Western New York. As you know, in 2021, there was a budget proposal to create a vacant and underutilized tax on properties owned by foreigners. My understanding was that was put in place to address a problem specific to Toronto and to Vancouver, where national interests were buying large swaths of property and then keeping them vacant for long periods of time, perhaps speculating in terms of real estate investment. The problem, as I read, as it related to Toronto and Vancouver and the country as a whole, was that it was taking supply of housing off the market for a period of time, and that would create a demand issue where property costs were rising for Canadian citizens. The problem is it also included the Niagara region. And as I said, a cottage is usually a small home in close proximity to a beach or a park, and it is used seasonally. It's not underutilized. It's used fully for the seasonal purpose for which those homes were built. And we have heard from more than 400 constituents who have owned property in Canada, in the Niagara region, in many cases for 30, 40 years. It's multi-generational. And I appealed to the members who came to visit me in my Washington office, and I appreciate very much this follow-up. And I would ask for consideration of possibly providing a carve-out for a piece of property that is considered to be a cottage near a lake or a park that is seasonal in nature because, as I said, these properties are fully utilized within the season. So Americans will typically, go to Canada on Memorial Day, which is our unofficial start of summer, and stay, in their Canadian cottages through Labor Day. And now they're being taxed at 1% because of this vacant and underutilized tax. So that's the purpose of appearing before you today. Again, I appreciate very, very much the long historical ties economically and in terms of life quality between the United States and Canada. I remember fondly on September 11, 2001, when the American airspace was shut down. 38 passenger planes were forced out of the air, and they landed at a small town called Gander, Newfoundland. And they stayed there for weeks and in many cases months. And they were treated as friends and family. And I think that is typical of the relationship that has occurred between the United States and Canada. So with that, I'd be glad to take questions, to provide whatever additional information you may need relative to our efforts to ask for reconsideration of the vacant and underutilized property tax.
Thank you very much, Congressman. We'll turn to our rounds of questions, and the first round it will be Mr. Baldinelli for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Representative Higgins, for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for all that you do to promote the binational region and the strong ties that bind both our countries and the residents that live in our communities. As I said earlier, it's not an international border for those that live in the area. It's just a river that divides two friends and families, in fact. And so thank you for everything that you've done. We had the pleasure of meeting several months ago at your Buffalo office, as well as just recently in Washington to discuss several kind of binational issues. And of course, the unused housing tax issue came up. And from our perspective, and just a little information, is maybe perhaps some history for the committee. When were you first appraised of it? When were you beginning to get contacts? How many contacts have you had? And some of your efforts working with your American colleagues to notify Canada of the concerns that you have.
Yeah, thank you, Member of Parliament Baldinelli. We were, people started to get, they were contacted, and as you know, when the original bill was proposed, again, it was explicit in what it was attempting to mitigate or to fix, and that was again international interests purchasing large swaths of property in big cities, driving up the cost of those properties. And as the evolution of the bill was moving, it began to define what other properties would be included in there, and it kept getting closer and closer to Southern Ontario and the Niagara region. So it was about midpoint last year. And we made efforts through the ambassador's office, both the U.S. ambassador to Canada and the Canadian ambassador to the United States, that this is a concern. We needed to watch it, and began to make that distinction between what is a seasonal cottage and what is large apartment buildings being purchased for different purposes. And so it was the middle of last year.
I found it interesting. I was just reading up on some of the efforts that you've done, and you undertook an online survey with the residents that would contact your office, and some of the notions about the long-standing relationships these residents have had of, I believe it was over 160 people responded. Nearly 30% of responders have owned their Canadian property for over 50 years. and then with close to 40 owning their Canadian home between 20 and 49 years. Again, going back to that relationship that exists, people come, they don't just come for a finite vacation period. Because we're so close, people can stay in Crystal Beach, for example, and then just go to work in the morning in Buffalo and in Western New York. So they have those long-standing ties. I talked earlier about Cherry Hill Golf Course, established in 1922 by 9 Americans. And the one Roman Catholic Church, St. George's, celebrated its 100th anniversary. And in the summertime, the congregation swells because of our American visitors. And people don't understand when the government tries to take an overarching policy with a broad brush, sometimes they miss the intricacies and the carve-outs that need to be done. And I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, Tony, I think you nailed it better than I could have. I'm familiar with St. George's Church because I used to go to church there when I would spend my summers in Canada at Bay Beach in Crystal Beach. And again, this is, as you point out, this is a way of life. I can remember, as a very, very young kid through adulthood, spending summers at Bay and Crystal Beach. And we believe, we were always greeted as friends and as neighbors. We feel as though when people are living in Canada on a seasonal basis, they are net contributors to the economy. And we welcome our Canadian friends into Western New York in the same way. There is a ski village 60 miles south of Buffalo called Ellicottville. And a lot of Canadian citizens own condominiums there. The way that you know that is because during December, January, February, March, you go into the town of Ellicottville and half of the town is Ontario license plates. And I think that is the great benefit for both Canadians and Americans to live on a border community. And to promote that, I think is in the best interest of both countries. There's 120 land ports of entry. The second largest crossing between the United States and Canada is the Peace Bridge, and that connects Buffalo to Fort Erie and Southern Ontario through the whole province of Ontario. So it's a lot of common interests, a lot of common history, a lot of common culture, and we want to preserve that and strengthen it moving forward. I was talking to some of my folks today about, we're surrounded by friends and fish, not by hostility, not by instability. We're trading partners, we're friends. Our economies are deeply integrated. I think what we learned during the pandemic for 36 months, my federal government did not handle that issue well. And the United States and Canada federal government should have been working more closely, coordinating a communication strategy and policy as it related to COVID. And I just think that, we should learn from that and bring our ties closer together.
Great. That's the time. So we'll now turn to Mr. Varani for 6 minutes.
Well, Representative Higgins, it's good to see you so shortly after we just saw you in Washington. Thank you for your hospitality. I was sitting on one of the couches in your office very, very recently, and I recollect you telling us a lot about Canada-U.S. relations, and I don't recollect you describing it as friends and fish. I would have added snow and sports, but that is a pretty apt description. But Representative Higgins, again, let me just echo what Mr. Belden-Elliott said in terms of your own leadership with Canada-U.S. relations, your own hospitality of us, and in trying to constantly advance what is an important relationship and has been historically important, and taking it and ensuring that we deal with any obstacles or challenges, but also taking it to the next level. What I'd say is that obviously we know that there's obviously the nation-to-nation interest. There's Canada in your state. There's Canada even in your district. And we know about some of those extensive ties. And I was actually digging it up again about the extensive connections we have with the 26th district, which you represent, where 6,200 people are employed at 163 Canadian businesses. And your district exports $1.1 billion into our country and receives $484 million from our country. So that's quite staggering. What we're trying trying to do, I guess, Representative Higgins, is just sort of figure out how to calibrate this as best as possible. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit. You'll recollect, so I am on the Trade Committee, obviously. I work with Minister Ng as her parliamentary secretary, and we chatted briefly in your office. And we're just trying to get this right to the benefit of addressing what you identified as a fair rationale, but that one that doesn't disproportionately impact your important residents that you represent, or people that are coming over and shopping and purchasing in places like Tony's Riding, et cetera. I understand right now, Representative Higgins, that if the location, let's say we've talked a lot about Crystal Beach, if the location at Crystal Beach is not a year-round location, so the property that's owned, it's not subject to this tax. So that is one of my understandings. And I also understand that if the location at Crystal Beach, hypothetically, is used for, a resident of Western New York who's actually studying at Brock University in St. Catharines and living there, it's also not subject to the tax. Do I have that understanding correct, Representative Higgins?
I don't. I mean, my understanding is that all of the cottage communities that have cottages or homes owned by Americans are subject to this tax.
What we have with us here is sort of some information that talks about sort of some of the exemptions. So we can make sure we get that to you. But there are some exemptions that are based on who's using it, when they use it, type of occupant, et cetera. So a place that's not being used a year round, so it would not be winterized, for example, is not subject to the tax as it's currently contemplated. And secondly, a place that might be used by not necessarily the couple that owns it, but maybe by their child who's studying in Canada would also not be subject to it. But we've had some discussion just in the hour before you came on, Representative Higgins, about how you define sort of this urban-rural divide. Because you put your finger on it when you said, there's acute problems in places like Toronto and Vancouver. And I'd say to you, it actually extends a bit beyond Toronto and Vancouver. It sort of applies to many large urban centers, a Calgary, a Montreal, a Halifax, et cetera. But it seems like Crystal Beach and other areas are caught up in what we define as urban. Is that the tension that you're identifying, is how we define what is urban versus what is rural? Because we feel a strong necessity of targeting urban properties that are driving up the prices for rental and for purchasing in urban centers. So can you give me your sort of feedback on this urban-rural definition as it's contained in the regulation so far?
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize, based on my American experience, my Western New York experience, as places like Bay Beach, Crystal Beach, Thunder Bay, Shirkston, as rural areas. I think, what I have been conditioned to view them as is cottage communities. They're interconnected. They're typically in close proximity to the water. These homes were built to be seasonal homes. And cottages are, by their very nature, a vacation destination used on a seasonal basis. So I wouldn't necessarily, from my own experience, make the distinction between Toronto and, let's say, Crystal Beach, Ontario is urban versus rural. My view would be that it's very, very different, perhaps its own categorization of a cottage community, because historically that's what Americans have viewed places like Crystal Beach and Bay Beach, etc., to be.
If I could ask you one further question, Representative Higgins. Right now, as the regulation stands, it doesn't, there are certain exemptions, but the exemptions don't apply, meaning that you are subject to the tax if you own multiple properties. I presume you don't have an issue of people that have multiple properties being subjected to this tax. You're talking about more about sort of that mom and pop who's had one property in Canada in one of these more remote locations that they actually are using. Is that fair? Do I have your position accurate?
Well, I think what we have heard from our citizens that are citizens of the United States who have for generations been going to Canada The issue of multiple ownership doesn't come up. I mean, we're primarily advocating for people that have a new tax being imposed because of this vacant and underutilized. And it's not for like an investor that would be buying a lot of properties. It's for the individuals who own a cottage and use the cottage themselves, and those who have had cottages in their families that's turned over to future generations. So there's a great tradition there. So it's primarily for the owner occupied cottage owners in those areas that we spoke of.
Thank you.
Savard Tremblay and Representative Higgins, just to be clear, the translation button on your Zoom is down there, as I assume Monsieur Tremblay will be speaking en français.
Is there a translation button?
It's a
Monsieur le Représentant.
It's a globe.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Zoom, it will say translation.
Got it. Go ahead, sir.
Ça marche?
Is it okay? I just want to be certain before beginning that Mr. Higgins can understand what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Alors,
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet with you. Often we go to Washington and visit your office, and been on 2 missions to Washington, and I was thinking about buying a place in Washington to be able to go there more frequently to make it easier to go. And thank you for your attachment to the relationship between Canada and the United States. And you sent a letter to the trade representative where you say that this tax does not reflect the agreements between Canada, United States, and Mexico, and that this is the main agreement between our countries. And could you say more in that regard? Because on this side, in the Bloc Québécois, we have some concerns with regard to a provincial jurisdiction, but there's also a problem with international trade law, I would think.
Yeah, we're talking about the U.S. Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, and there is a provision relative to non-discrimination against member countries as it relates to taxation. So this is what I have cited in communicating with the United States Trade Representative Catherine Tai through letter, but also within the context of the House Ways and Means Committee on which I serve, including the Trade Subcommittee.
Yes, of course, that's what you did. But this non-discrimination clause, are you certain that, legally speaking, this tax would be a violation of that clause? There's no doubt in your mind?
We're asking that the trade representative initiate a consultation with our Canadian counterparts to determine whether or not this would be in violation of that provision of the trade agreement.
Thank you very much. In other words, you're raising this possibility to shed some light on the situation. But as far as you know, before going into any type of litigation or formal process, have there been any discussions between the meeting that we had with you through at the parliamentary level before this study that we're doing? Have the 2 governments consulted with regard to this tax?
I don't believe that they have formally consulted as of yet. That doesn't mean they're not going to. We also, have communicated with the United States Secretary of State. I think, like anything, if there's a dispute, regardless of how serious or minor between 2 countries, particularly 2 countries of this nature, that you want to resolve these things diplomatically. And you have a Canadian federal government that is structured in a way very similar to ours. And like most problems, be they or between governments in an international context, they can be resolved by just communicating clearly as to what the issue is and what a mutually beneficial outcome would be.
And you said that you were considering a policy that might be similar for Canadians that might have property in the United States. So that would that be your idea to adopt a similar provision for Canadians with properties in the U.S.?
Yeah, no, I have made reference to that, which I have characterized as a race to the bottom. That doesn't benefit Canadian citizens. It doesn't benefit American citizens. And that's why I put an emphasis on attempting to resolve this issue diplomatically. We don't want to do that. I think I have brought that issue up to highlight that there are mutual benefits to Canadian citizens owning property in the United States, a beautiful natural environment, ski country, Ellicottville, New York, and a beautiful natural environment during the summer months of Bay Beach and Crystal Beach, Ontario, that is in close proximity to beaches and to lakes. So that was the purpose why I brought that up, was to highlight the importance of trying to resolve these issues in a diplomatic way.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you very much. My last question. I think I have about 30 seconds left. How many of your colleagues, because I imagine you've discussed this with your colleagues, how many of them are also concerned by this issue?
Not enough. We have sent bipartisan letters, both Republicans and Democrats from the House, who represent border communities. And there have been, a handful, 12 to 20 on any given communication, just to highlight this. But I think as I mentioned, the Peace Bridge that connects Buffalo with Southern Ontario is the second largest border crossing. So this is a border community, Buffalo and Niagara Falls, that is disproportionately influenced by this. But others are in fact affected by it and have signed on. But given the size of their communities that they represent along the border, I guess that would influence their level of involvement.
Thank you very much. Now going to move on to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Representative Higgins, for being with us today. And I'll just continue with that line of questioning, because I represent a district in the South Okanagan, West Kootenay, Southern British Columbia, along the border, very similar in many ways to Niagara, except there's no big urban center directly across the border. We're probably 4 or 5 hours away from Seattle. And so we have relatively small amounts of, cross-border traffic coming from Washington for tourism. I think there was more, 50 years ago in proportionate terms, but right now I think we get more Australians visiting the Okanagan area than we get Americans coming as tourists. And certainly I have never heard of an American actually owning a holiday home in my riding, except there is one founder of a big tech company based in Seattle, who I will not name, who has a wonderful home in my riding, but it's certainly not a cottage. So I guess my question to all this is, how widespread. It sounds like this is sort of a North Shore of Lake Erie situation. Because, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay just asked you how many of your colleagues have experienced this or faced this. I'm just wondering if we have a vacancy and a tax in British Columbia. I'm just lost the name in my mind, and it's set in certain areas. We take areas that have real problems with housing costs, real problems with housing availability, and we put boundaries around those. So certain municipalities face this tax and others do not. And I'm just wondering if that kind of carve out, so it's not just urban rural, it's certain areas. And I'm just wondering if that kind of approach might fix this if we find that it is really concentrated in your area, and you seem to be at the pointed end of the stick in this.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, a cottage is used fully on a seasonal basis. And, Canadians enjoy coming to Elginville, New York on a seasonal basis. And I think that is a mutual benefit accruing to both countries. So all communities along the northern border between the Canada and the United States, which is 5,500 miles long, as you know, and 120 land ports of entry, there are going to be unique characteristics. And I think the unique characteristic of the situation that I'm concerned with, again, is mutually beneficial to the United States and Canada. And when I say that I spent my summers on the Canadian shores of Lake Erie, that's virtually every summer, from being a kid consistently through being an adult. And it's not, my situation was not unique. I mean, that's a thing in Buffalo and Western New York. Our ability to attract low-cost air carriers to the Buffalo Niagara International Airport is owing in large part to 30% of the people using the Buffalo Niagara International Airport are Canadians. Canadians spend $15 million in healthcare in my community. Our retail economy is profoundly influenced. Higher education, cultural organizations, and it's a quality of life that I think both Canadians and Americans share, given the fact that these cottage communities were built over many, many years, and the ownership is multi.
Okay, I have about a minute left, and I'll just continue on with that. And I think one of the differences, again, from the situation in my district than yours is that in my district, the trend is going the opposite way. We have hundreds and hundreds of homes, homes that had families living in them, kids going to school in my riding are now owned by people who don't live there. They come there in the summer. And so it hollows out the community. And these are not Americans, I would say. These are people from Vancouver and Calgary, et cetera. There's a few Americans, as I said, but this is the situation we're facing in my riding. It's, as I say, we have a tax in British Columbia that partially addresses this. And it seems very different from your situation, which is a historic generational, cottages. What the situation we're facing in my riding are houses that have turned from family-owned resident houses to seasonal houses.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, Mr. Canning, so we're now going to move to the next round. Mr. Carey for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Representative Higgins, first of all, I wanted to start by thanking you for all the work that you've done over the years on the Northern Border Caucus and all your advocacy during COVID-19. I do understand, though, that there is a significant international controversy. That's whether you're a better hockey player than Tony Baldinelli. I think some things cannot be resolved diplomatically. We may have to resolve that on the rink. But I do know that you, back in May of 2022, you were mentioned in an article, U.S. Trade, about this issue, so you were on top of it pretty much right away for your constituents. You said over 400 of them. And my understanding is on May 5th, 2022, USTR did discuss the UHT with Canada's Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development. Do you know the results of that conversation, or have you heard anything at your end? That was like over a year ago.
Nothing nothing conclusive about that. I characterize that as the initiation of a discussion that is open-ended and continues. And as you know, sometimes these issues require, several meetings, several engagements toward the goal of developing, first of all, an appreciation for the problem, and secondly, a solution to it that would not, hurt our Canadian friends, but would be encouraging for the continuation of these cottage communities to thrive with American ownership.
Do you know if there's any information from that meeting available for public use? And I was wondering if you know if there's any future discussions planned, if you're aware of them, or if perhaps maybe you may have been included in them, or Mr. Baldinelli, have you heard of anything?
Yeah, from my part, I can certainly check to see if there is any follow-up and if there is any communications that resulted from those meetings. Part of my job, and I think, my Canadian counterparts as members of Parliament, as you know, it's much like journalism. It's reach and frequency. So oftentimes it's very difficult to change policy that's currently in place. So you have to find ways to bring those issues to light. And there are many ways of doing that. And I try to do it within the context of, the legislative branch and my work as a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, but also in my interactions between, the trade representative, the Secretary of State, and the respective ambassadors. So it's an ongoing, I would characterize this as an ongoing discussion. When the tax was put in place, there was an interpretation or did the tax reflect the Parliament's intent? And as that evolved, that is when it became more concerning for me and my constituents, who are a lot of those cottage owners in Canada.
In the fall of 2021, the Department of Finance did say they consulted with stakeholders, and I was just wondering, any people that you represent, are you aware of anybody that was consulted, and if they were, could you give us a number of how many? We had a previous witness that said he was unaware of these consultations. I was just wondering, before this was put into place, were you aware of any consultations?
No, I'm not, and I guess you wouldn't expect that, because you're imposing or creating a new policy as it relates to taxation. I guess the Canadian government's primary concern is going to be Canadian citizens, as would be the case when the United States takes actions. I think this situation is unique because it affects a northern border community that I represent. So I don't know that there was any consultation on the part of the Canadian federal government with American counterparts.
My colleague, Madame Gladue, had a quick question for you.
Thank you, Representative Higgins, for being here. Certainly, I agree. We're very thankful that you're here to work with us. Nobody wants the race to the bottom to put more taxes on either Canadians or Americans. But in trying to scope out who should be exempted, would you be able to provide the committee with a definition of who you think should be exempted in order for this to be equitable? And yeah, I guess the second question would be, my opinion is if people are exempt, they should not have to file taxes at all. Would you agree?
Well, I would agree that I think that I use Toronto and Vancouver as densely developed areas, and one of the members who spoke previously of Parliament indicated that there are other more densely developed areas, and I understand that. I think, a cottage is a small house that's near a lake or a beach that's used on a seasonal basis. And I think that...
I'm gonna have to interrupt there. We're already almost 30 seconds over. Maybe in the next round, you can continue to answer. We'll now go to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Congressman Higgins. And we met quite a few years ago. I was in Washington. We attended a public works working group, a session together, and we had the opportunity to discuss. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, and obviously you knew my good friend Teddy Nolan, who was Coach of the Year in Buffalo. And, before I go too further, I wanted to also, and we also discussed the 230 tariffs, and I wanted to highlight and thank you with the deepest thanks for you coming out against them. I think your quote was these misguided tariffs on our neighbors to the north, and I really do appreciate that. So, I'm in Sault Ste. Marie. We have a sister city, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Jeopardy question that was on Jeopardy one time is what was the third oldest permanent settlement in America? Well, it's Sault Ste. Marie. And so the unique difference is we're larger than the American side. Our city is much larger than their side. So we have people that own property on either side of the border there. But Congressman, my question to you, because your statement that you made, I want to make sure that we have it perfectly clear for our analysts to record it, because we one of our previous panelists who, in my opinion, obviously represents the people that he represents very well, had indicated, there should be an exemption for rural and urban, like it should be just carte blanche, like for Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, someone purchasing a home. But in your testimony, you really seem to be talking about rural areas. So number one, I just want you to clarify that's what you're looking at. You're not looking at exemptions for larger urban centers in Canada, as well as there exists a 28-day exemption right now for, and this is what the gentleman was getting at, there's in the 28 days, those people who are here for 28 days that are in rural areas are exempt from this tax. So I just want you to make some comments on my questions and about the difference between rural, urban, and the 28-day exemption. Thank you.
Yeah, the 28-day exemption I was not familiar with because the people that we're hearing from will typically, spend time in their cottages, as I mentioned, from Memorial Day, the end of May, through the beginning of September. And a lot of those folks are subject to that taxation. You make that distinction between urban and rural. I understand that. To me, it's a cottage community that is, the homes there or the structures there are disproportionately seasonal in nature. So, that would be the objective to hold those folks harmless so that they can continue to enjoy their cottages on a seasonal basis, which would be considerably more than 28 days.
I don't know the housing situation in New York State. Is there a housing shortage there as well? And could you talk about maybe the northern? I know you still might be the chair of the Northern Border States.
Yeah.
Are housing shortages being felt in the northern part of the United States?
There's what they would refer to as affordable housing shortages. So, there's a lot of housing. Much of it is not accessible to people of modest means. And that's an ongoing issue in New York State, but it's an ongoing issue in the United States generally. And when you see, areas like San Francisco, they're going through a lot of urban challenges. They're typically, the basis of that is the lack of affordable housing, a lot of homelessness and issues related to that. So I would say that it would be fair to say that we could use more affordable housing in Buffalo and throughout New York State, but throughout the entire country as well.
And what strategies are you guys using? Just out of curiosity, because I think we're also looking at various things as well. And what things have been successful in New York State at dealing with affordable housing?
A lot of things that things like affordable housing tax credits, providing tax incentives for developers to build in areas that they historically would not. That is a strategy that we've used. Has there been some success? Yes. Is it all the success that we hoped for? No.
It's the time, so we're going to move on to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to talk, and I think we all agree on the fact that there is a well-founded need to respond to the crisis in housing and speculation. I know that there's a housing crisis in the United States as well. Maybe you could help us to think about this tax. For example, if this were to, how would you work to counter the speculation and the housing crisis?
In Canada?
Non, chez vous, aux États-Unis.
No, in the United States. I mean, that could provide some inspiration for us, perhaps.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, historic tax credits, affordable housing tax credits are used to provide market-based incentives for developers to undertake those kinds of projects that would make housing available for people of modest means. But the nature of developers, as you know, is to speculate about not the current value of property, but the future value of property. And I think that creates problems in the United States. It obviously creates problems in Canada as well. And I think that was the origin of the vacant and underutilized tax that was approved in 2021. But when I look at my community of Buffalo, the fastest growing neighborhood in Western New York is downtown Buffalo. Why is that? Because the use of historic tax credits, we have a lot of historic buildings that were built, 130 years ago. But they were vacant for a long time, the changing economy. So the tax credit was put in place to provide, in some cases, 30-40% incentive for a developer to undertake a project. So, for example, if there was a $10 million project in downtown Buffalo that a developer would have to take on, its historic nature made it a very expensive project to convert, if you will, from office space to residential space. So if it's $10 million project and you can save $30 million or $3 million because of a historic tax credit, then a $10 million project becomes a $7 million project. And the justification for providing that tax credit is that that project would not have been undertaken because it was cost prohibitive without the tax credit. So it's a good investment that works for the developer, but works for the people that will eventually live there as well.
And that's the time we have for that. We'll go to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I'll let Representative Higgins answer the question I rambled on about at the end of my time earlier, and that was, is this a Lake Erie shore problem? Do you hear from colleagues of yours like Rick Larson of similar situations? And I'm just wondering how we can carve this out, because I'm kind of bothered by a definition of a cottage as being a small house used seasonally, because, well, I can get to that later. But if you can just talk about how widespread this situation is.
Yeah, I think it depends on the geographic area. I think some areas are more affected than others. In this case, you talk about urban versus rural, those distinctions. Buffalo is an urban center. Niagara Falls, New York is an urban center. And that's one of the reasons why I think, Canada and, those beaches that I talked about in particular is an attractive place, because during the summer months, people are able to vacation in these cottages. And I think, if you look at the 120 land ports of entry, there's probably similarities to Buffalo, the Niagara region of Southern Ontario, but there are probably distinctions as well. So I think, the kind of structure that it is, I mean, when you see it, you know it. Cottages are typically, they don't have basements. They don't, have a lot of things that you would have to do to a home to make it suitable or livable all year round. But I think cottages are particularly unique. And when you drive through places like Bay Beach and Crystal Beach, right, you see how those structures are unique.
So
30 seconds, Mr.
So
Cannings.
if you were writing an amendment to this legislation, how would you define small and, in legal terms? That's what I'm concerned about when we're talking about those descriptions.
Representative, Representative, there's about 20 seconds. So I'm going to suggest that if you want, why don't you submit that to the committee in writing what you think that proposal is. And given the time, committee members, I'm going to suggest this last round we do 3 minutes each for the Conservatives and the Liberals. So Ms. Gladue for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to follow up on my colleagues' comments, and that I'm from the riding of Sarnia-Lambton, obviously also a border community, and we have lots of cottages. But I would say that across the province and across the country, there are ski chalets, there are fishing camps, moose camps. There's a lot of different kinds of properties that Americans do own that they use intermittently. And so one of the difficulties I see with the way the regulations were rolled out, for example, is in the example that you mentioned, Representative Higgins, Crystal Beach is defined as an urban community, and so the 28-day exemption doesn't apply there. And so I think some clarity to make sure that, we get rid of this rural-urban definition that doesn't seem to be capturing it, and really address the things that are meant to help the affordable housing situation and exclude all those things that really have no bearing on it, which in my mind are many of the things in your area. Now, one thing I would ask is, are there any similar taxes that are put in place in the U.S. that you are knowing about?
Well, not a federal tax. I think that, obviously there are jurisdictions that also have taxing authority, be it a county in Florida or a state. They certainly may exist. And I think, perhaps that's where this is different. There isn't a federal tax on properties owned by Canadians, for example. So I wouldn't be familiar with that.
Thank you. And if this doesn't get expediently resolved, what do you think the timing is when this would be raised with the USMCA through the American channels?
I don't know. I mean, I would push to have it, done as soon as possible. But, we're approaching this from several different angles, including that one. My objective would be just to continue to raise concerns about this. And, I already think that, we're all economic actors. When we're confident, we move, and when we're not, we don't. And the greatest inducement to travel is ease of travel. And I think that on the part of both Canadian citizens and citizens in the United States, travel between our two countries, at least in terms of using the land ports of entry, has become much more difficult. And my concern is that over time, people will adjust their economic behavior to avoid the cross-border experience at those land ports of entry. And I don't think that's good for Canada, and I don't think it's good for the United States. And I think these are the kinds of things that, in the aggregate, will influence people's decision as to whether or not they're going to decide to travel. We talked about golf courses over in Canada.
We're about, we're about 30 seconds over. So, Mr. Arya, our last questions for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Higgins, thank you so much for coming before our committee. Canada and US, we have a long-standing, biggest trading partnership in the world, and sometimes there will be small differences in terms of policies, and we have always resolved it through dialogue, through the means that is available. Quick question. I believe you had written to the United States Trade Representative that this tax is inconsistent with the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement. Has USTR confirmed and agreed with you that this is inconsistent to CUSMA agreement?
Well, I'm a member of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Subcommittee on Trade. I helped in the development of that trade agreement. I believe that, I've shared with many of you this, that we should have had a bi-national approach to a tri-national agreement. And that is, Canada is a country of 38 million people. You have an economy of a little over $2 trillion. We're a country of 330 million people. We have an economy of $24 trillion. Canadians value the same things as America does. Worker rights, environment, etc. We're very similar in that regard. The objective of free trade agreements is to bring everybody's standard of living to a higher level. But when you look at the standard of living in the United States and Canada, it is very similar. And when you look at Mexico and the fact that they have
I think I have less than 1 minute. I believe.
Go ahead.
I believe in May 2022, in Inside U.S. Trade, you wrote an article saying that UHT violates the 1984 convention between the Canada and the United States of America with respect to taxes on income and capital, the tax treaty. Have you got any feedback from the U.S. administration on your contention?
This was the tax treaty of 1984? Is that what you mentioned, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't.
Okay. So my information is wrong that you wrote an article on that. And quickly, from what I heard previously from you is that you are, I'm just paraphrasing it, that you are okay if this sort of tax is levied on people owning multiple properties in a typical urban area. Am I correct?
Well, I think you're correct, and I understand why Canada would impose a tax on large swaths of land because of the larger problem that it creates. So what I believe about that is really not relevant. That's for you to decide. I suppose what I would ask you to consider is whether or not, this tax, the vacant and underutilized tax, was intended to affect communities. You refer to them as rural communities far outside of the urban areas. I refer to them as cottage communities. Was that the intent? And if it wasn't, is there some way that could be contemplated as it relates to, revising that to exclude certain properties like seasonal properties that it was not seemingly intended to include?
Thank you. I'm going to have to interrupt there. Thank you so much, Representative Higgins, for coming to the committee today. With the committee's consent, I will adjourn the meeting. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.